Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, Africa's Davos. It's the 24th World Economic Forum on Africa, but held in Nigeria for the first time. But the continent's biggest economy is grabbing the world's attention for all the wrong reasons. We speak to some of the players at the World Economic Forum about how Nigeria and Africa confront their biggest challenges. Also this week, the power of the Nile. Ethiopia is building one of the largest dams in the world, but it's got a big price tag on it. Can the Grand Renaissance Dam make an economic and a social difference? And what looks like a record in the making, Alibaba, China's biggest online commerce company, gives us a first look at its books as it plans to go public. So in business, in life really, timing is everything. And that's quite possibly what the organisers of the World Economic Forum on Africa have been thinking this past week. Yes, it's coincided with the host Nigeria becoming Africa's largest economy, but also with that kidnapping of over 200 schoolgirls by Boko Haram and a separate attack on a village which left hundreds of people dead. So big concerns about security and the threat of armed groups. This week we'll look at it all, country and continent-wide, as one of the world's biggest economic roadshows came to Abuja.
It takes years of planning to organise an event like the World Economic Forum, even more so when you're dealing with a first-time host. And by the opening of the conference, with 6,000 soldiers and police on duty, Nigeria was well aware of its responsibilities.
We have upped the ante in the sense that we have increased our presence in the streets. I can assure you that Kaduna and Abuja will remain very, very safe while the World Economic Forum is ongoing.
And part of that safety was achieved by simply clearing the streets, closing down businesses and schools during the forum. It was a necessary evil, perhaps, but with so much focus on Nigerian security right now, after the kidnapping of more than 270 schoolgirls by the armed group Boko Haram, people were looking for something a little more long-term.
When there's a program or an event, you put security everywhere and then stop work and labor hours wasted and all that. People just waste the whole 3 days doing nothing. And so I think it's something that needs to be approached in a way that it should be a permanent approach.
Back at the forum though, delegates wanted to focus on Africa's economic issues. In Nigeria alone, youth unemployment's close to 80%, a tangible example of what the World Economic Forum wants to tackle.
We look forward to discussions around growth that leaves no one behind, growth that strengthens societies, not weakens them, growth that delivers quality public services. And this is why we gave our meeting this year the theme of forging inclusive growth and creating jobs.
So you see, there is a conflict in play here. Largest economy, yes, $510 billion worth actually, but some big problems to contend with as well. For example, the 60% of Nigerians who live in extreme poverty, and on top of that, all these security fears, the almost daily violence in the north by Boko Haram, which is killing scores of Nigerians. There are chronic power shortages, which can add up to 40% of the cost of doing business in Nigeria. In fact, the whole national grid there only delivers about as much electricity as where I am right now, Qatar, and that isn't nearly as big or populous. And for a country with great oil wealth, there is this mysterious issue of falling oil revenues. You might remember the central bank governor, Lamido Sanusi. He was suspended after blowing the whistle on a $20 billion hole in the accounts of the state oil company. So there are lots of issues to discuss. They come out of the forum, and just long-term issues as well for Nigeria and Africa as a whole. And we're going to discuss all of this now with Henrik Dutoy, who is joining us from Abuja. He's the CEO of Investec Asset Management, which is based in South Africa, and we thank you for your time. I want to start, Hendrik, with, well, this actually might end up being some myth debunking. What's it really like at the forum in Abuja? Because, from outside, we're looking at Nigeria through this prism of security fears and nerves. What's it been like for you as a delegate there?
I mean, right now, Abuja is probably the safest place in the world because there's a massive security blanket around it, and at the forum, interestingly, the focus was very much on showing solidarity with Nigeria, and it was also about understanding that the true solution for the Boko Haram problem, and in fact many other armed conflicts, is economic progress rather than more fists of steel, because they don't really work in the long run.
Well, let's talk about economic progress then, shall we? Because on the face of it, you can say Nigeria, for example, is doing really well. It is, as we keep saying, it is now Africa's largest economy after leapfrogging South Africa. But still, you can't ignore those issues which we listed, you know, the poverty, the inequality, all the security concerns on top of that as well. How does a country like Nigeria start to tackle those issues?
I mean, the interesting thing to me about the World Economic Forums since the financial crisis has really been that people have started to treat business, political life and society as not as separate entities, but as linked activities and linked entities which can only live in a symbiotic way. And that is the big insight that I come away from this World Economic Forum, that from politicians to business people, it's the problems of society first, and then how business can benefit, which is quite a positive conclusion. It's the old debate of business versus, you know, the excluded, I think, is fading.
Yeah, well, maybe it's not even a debate or any sort of battle like that between the two. It's maybe it's more about the ways. You say business can help, and well, particularly in Africa, help create jobs, because yeah, that's the big issue, isn't it?
And I think that what's so exciting about Africa now, in spite of the long list of challenges you mentioned earlier, is that policymakers and governments by and large understand that, and therefore they always start off by saying we're open for business, we need enterprise, we need to compete, and we need to educate our people, because we're going to have this very large cohort of young people coming into the labor market, and we'll have to find jobs for them. And that's very different from 15, 20 years ago, when economies wanted to close up and governments wanted to control anything. So I'm in that sense pretty optimistic. If I compare this with a debate in Europe, I must say the African debate is refreshing. And we invest a lot of money, you know, outside the African continent, you know, more than $100 billion. So we follow those debates as well.
Tell me about things in South Africa, where you are based with Investec. If we want to put it in rankings or number terms, I guess we're talking second placed as far as African economies go now, but obviously still a very big and very important economy. Elections have been happening there as well, which is crucial. Tell me about your hopes for the South African economy, because again, unemployment, big problem there.
I think this, interestingly, the contrast between South Africa and the rest of Africa, in a sense, is that South Africa has not felt all the pain that some of these other countries have felt, and therefore opened up and become, you know, have a desire to compete, which is so strong. In South Africa at the moment, we're still too inwardly focused, and may this election pass quickly, and may the government start implementing rather than talking about economic policy, because the potential is vast. The sophistication of South Africa matched with a market size of the rest of Africa, of sub-Saharan Africa in particular, is a very positive formula. The capacity in South Africa is there, but we will have to translate that into action, particularly action getting people labor market ready. And that means changing our education system. And that's the big structural challenge for that country going forward.
Final thought then, Hendrik, on the forum itself, just to bring it back to where you are and what's happening there. You've made the point, and we've all talked about it, how the security issue has obviously played on people's minds there. It's going to. But you said that they've been looking at how to fix it by using business and using the economy to help fix these security problems. Does that say to you that the politicians and the delegates and everyone they're on the same page now as far as fighting these problems?
I think that the Chinese Premier gave a very, very good speech this morning about the relationship between China and Africa, and it was all about delivery. And my sense is that African leaders are understanding that delivery is what's going to be required. In business, you have no option. If you don't deliver, you go bust. And I think there is a sense that it's now the do moment for Africa, because there's been a lot of talk about the rising Africa. There's been a lot of positive sentiment, but if there will be no follow-through or not enough follow-through, then the African continent will not have such a rosy future. And I think that is the one consensus point that's very clear. We have to do.
That is Hendrik du Toit from Investec Asset Management, joining us from the World Economic Forum there in Abuja. It has been fascinating talking to you. We really thank you for your time and your insight today.
Thank you very much.
All right, so that's Henrik du Toit there. As we mentioned, and as we referred to there in that interview as well, security, the kidnapping of the Nigerian schoolgirls, very much on people's minds at the forum.
We cannot allow terrorism to dictate our agendas.
WEF founder Klaus Schwab there. He led the delegates, including the Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan and the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, in a moment's silence for the kidnapped girls. Li was making his first official visit to Africa. He really talked up closer trade and investment ties. Nigeria is actually one of China's biggest African partners. Last year, trade between the two countries reached about $13.6 billion. Let's go back to Abuja now and talk to John Aarons about this. He's with the business advisory firm FTI Consulting and is a delegate at the forum. John, thank you for your time. China always seems to be the big story when it comes to African investment. Tell me a little more about it. And, you know, what you've seen of the Chinese presence there at the forum.
Yes, it's very interesting. In a number of the sessions that I've been attending, people have been referring to the Chinese question. And I think there is a lot of interest in China's presence here. We've seen the Chinese Premier, Mr. Li, here addressing the main plenary session. A very large delegation that appears to be with him, a very visible Chinese presence. And it's interesting that, on the other hand, there are not so many people from the Western countries. Perhaps they've been, distracted by some of the security issues here. But the Chinese are here, clearly very committed. And somebody was saying earlier that, you know, nobody goes to visit another country with the interests of the country they're visiting solely in mind. They go because they're self-interested. So I think, you know, the Chinese view of their own self-interest in Africa is very clearly understood. But I think increasingly African governments are keen to ensure that they are protecting their own interests and negotiating a good deal for themselves.
Well, this was sort of going into my next question, actually. Do you feel it is, between China and Africa, a real partnership? Or is it just big old China with all its money, all its trillions of dollars in reserves, moving into Africa and creating something of a first mover advantage for itself?
Well, look, I think, you know, China's been very effective at moving its capital in here and moving its labour here to some extent. I think there are reservations about that, but one of the responses that we're hearing from some of the African delegates here is if the West doesn't like us doing business with China, why does the West do business with China? You know, there's plenty of partnerships that we see between Europe, between North America and other Asian countries and China. China is clearly, you know, too big to ignore. On the other hand, I think we're seeing some reservations about the Chinese approach in Africa. Western companies clearly find the competition pretty tough, and playing by Chinese rules on occasion is a tough game. But I think also you're hearing some of the African governments saying that the Chinese, when their approach tends to be one which doesn't leave sustainable job creation behind, because they will bring in labour with them. So, you know, there are pros and cons, but I think the African governments are pretty clear, and we shouldn't be, we shouldn't be patronising them. I think they know that there's a deal available for them working with the Chinese, and that's why you see the Nigerians here as host country, very willing to welcome them and thank them for coming against that background of security concern, which has clearly deterred other people from coming.
Fact is, John, you and I have been using the word or the term China as if it's some sort of monolithic block, if I can describe it like that, when really with China or with any investing country that we might talk about, it's about political investment, government investment, I guess is what I'm saying, and private business investment. Now, I know you've done some research on this. What are you finding where Africa's concerned with these different vehicles?
Well, I think we're seeing that Africa is in transition, of course, moving very fast. The situation here on the ground changes all the time, and one really has to be here to understand how, the current status of the situation. So in welcoming foreign investment, perhaps there were some characteristics of the early stage in recent years of foreign investment in Africa, and China, had some opportunities perhaps because there was a clear field available to them. But increasingly, I think foreign investors are operating in Africa with greater sophistication. There's a growing number of US financial institutions, for example, looking for ways to deploy capital in Africa, whereas the approach they might have taken to, let's call it due diligence or business intelligence in Africa was based on risk aversion, was based on trying to stay away from corruption, trying to stay away from security concerns and other types of risks. Our research has shown, I think, a very clear shift towards more constructive, proactive engagement with stakeholders in Africa.
Just a quick final thought, John, on the World Economic Forum in Africa itself, and this was something I asked our previous guest. As a delegate who's been there, what has it been like? Because again, for us, out here looking in, we're all talking about security and fears and Boko Haram and kidnappings and these sorts of things. It feels like it should be a very tense situation there.
Yes, well, as a delegate here at the forum, and it's not my first time, it is rather sad that we're in such a fortress kind of environment. This is, I'm sure, a very safe and secure centre that we're standing in, that I'm standing in, and the reason for that is that really it's been sealed off and the city has been closed down for a few days. It means that, of course, we could be almost anywhere in the world. We're in a conference and hotel complex, which could be just anywhere. We're not getting a chance to see the country. I think the other thing that's sad is that the small business owners in Abuja are not really getting much benefit from our presence here. And I think perhaps they were hoping that they were going to do some business with us in the restaurants and so forth out in the city. So it's sad. But as a delegate, once you're inside, well, frankly, it's just like any other meeting of the World Economic Forum, whether it's in Asia, Latin America, or here in Africa.
John Aarons there in Abuja. Thank you, John. Well, we talked a lot about China there, and Premier Lee's actually on a 4-nation Africa tour as part of this trip. Obviously, he started in Nigeria and then moved on to Kenya, with good reason too, as you'll see in this report from Jane Ferguson.
These students are singing in Mandarin, preparing to perform for China's Prime Minister. They are all aware of how important his visit is for Kenya.
I've studied Mandarin for 2 years now.
After years of studying the language, they hope to turn their hard work into jobs with Chinese companies based in Kenya.
So this is one of the great opportunities you have to even get a career or even start other careers or employ people. It's just massive. We're so excited about the whole opportunity.
Their teacher is excited too.
We encourage them to go to China and come back because we realize that actually there are so many opportunities for them, ranging, we have so many companies being established here in Kenya, and realize that the Chinese people will want local people who can be able to speak the language.
Many students at Nairobi University see their economic future tied to China.
The place where young Kenyans come to learn Mandarin is not just 1 or 2 classrooms here at Nairobi University. It's an entire institute. All of the classrooms are labelled in Chinese, and there's a lot of evidence of Chinese culture in these corridors. But on the stairway is a clear indicator of why so many young Kenyans want to learn Mandarin. There are many photographs of Kenyan business people in China selling their products.
China has been building business ties across Africa for years, with deals in mining, construction and trade.
CCTV Africa will...
China has also been building its soft power with media outlets across the continent.
Now they have included environment.
But some experts warn that countries like Kenya need to maintain business relations with a range of countries.
The importance of a multilateral approach to engaging other countries is that it gives the businesses and the relationship the kind of what you'll call the cushioning in case things go bad.
But for a new generation of Kenya's professionals, their dreams are in the East.
And still ahead on Counting the Cost, Alibaba, the online powerhouse that makes more money than Amazon and eBay combined, but many in the West have never heard of. We'll look at how the stock market plans for China's e-commerce giant could make history. We'll stay with Africa just now, though. Ethiopia, which has one of the continent's fastest growing non-oil economies. But is that enough to pay for what the country needs? For example, the Great Renaissance Dam, a massive infrastructure project and one which Ethiopia is going to pay for itself. That's $4 billion in one big hit. Mohammed Ado picks up the story now.
Deep in Ethiopia's Guba Valley, not far from its border with Sudan, engineers build the floor to the biggest hydroelectric dam in Africa. This is the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Being built on a tributary of the Nile, it will produce 6,000 megawatts of electricity once it's completed.
So this is unprecedented in Ethiopian history. The second thing is the dam has created a sense of nationalism within Ethiopians, where they're saying, you know, we've never used the Nile at all for a long period of time, but now we're able to use the Nile.
The dam is being built at a cost of $4 billion, money Ethiopia intends to pay by itself.
The dam is part of a massive public spending program on power, roads and railways in one of Africa's fastest growing economies. In the past decade, the Ethiopian economy has grown at least 10%, attracting investors from across the globe.
Not this year though. The economy is showing signs of a slowdown. The government recently declared that economic growth has dropped down to 9.7% from an earlier forecast of 11%. This is partly blamed on Ethiopia's decision to fund the dam itself. The dam has been controversial from the start, with Egypt vehemently opposing its construction. Egypt's opposition is informed by fears that the project will significantly reduce the flow of the Nile River and deprive millions of its people of such a vital resource. But the government here insists the project will have benefits beyond Ethiopia. A grand compromise between Nile riparian countries may be too late though. An army of 8,500 builders working 24 hours a day has already completed about a third of the dam.
Now, the big business story of the week was confirmation the Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba is planning to go public in the United States. It's filed for a $1 billion initial public offering. Analysts expect that'll raise between $15 and $20 billion, which could put it past Facebook's IPO. And if you've not heard of Alibaba before, well, you'll hear a lot more about it now, especially considering its total value has been estimated at $200 billion. It dominates online commerce in China through its flagship website, Alibaba.com, but also through other subsidies. You've got, for example, Tmall, which is similar to Amazon.com, i.e. letting brands and shops sell directly to customers. Taobao is known for auction-style selling, just like eBay does. And of course, there's Weibo, which we talked about a few weeks ago on the program, basically China's Twitter. Alibaba owns 30% of Weibo, which started trading on New York's NASDAQ exchange 3 weeks ago. But as we mentioned, Alibaba isn't necessarily the best-known brand going. Adrian Brown sent us this report on the background to China's undisputed king of e-commerce.
Outside of China, few people have heard of it. But within the country, Alibaba is the dominant online shopping portal. It's essentially a combination of Amazon and eBay, which makes it a very attractive business.
This is not the 800-pound gorilla in the room. This is the 800-ton. And maybe since it's a foreign stock, we should make that metric ton.
A heavyweight about to make its debut in the United States. But for now, the company won't say which stock exchange or how many shares it intends to sell. For many foreign investors, the Alibaba stock offering is a bit of an open sesame moment, a chance to invest in one of China's most promising new stocks.
It's going to make Facebook look like an also-ran as far as what they went through.
More than half Alibaba is owned by Japan's SoftBank and Yahoo. The company had a humble beginning. It was founded by Jack Ma 15 years ago in a one-room apartment. Today, Alibaba controls 45% of Chinese e-commerce. Up until now, Alibaba has never had to report its finances, but to make the listing, the company had to. And we now know that it generated revenues of almost $6.5 billion up until the end of December, making a net profit of almost $3 billion. And those profits are likely to grow, with predictions that China's online retail market will triple in value within the next 4 years.
And that was our show for this week, but there's more for you online at aljazeera.com. You just click through to the programs link, and from there you'll find the Counting the Cost page with all our previous episodes to catch up on. You can also get in touch with us. You can tweet either me at Kamal AJE. There's our business editor at Abid Oliver Ali, and don't forget to use the hashtag Counting the Cost as well. Or just drop us an old-fashioned email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is the address. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.